Poetic devices are a form of literary devices used in poetry. Poems are created out of poetic devices composed of structural, grammatical, rhythmic, metrical, verbal, and visual elements. They are really essential tools that a poet uses to create rhythm, enhance a poem's meaning, or intensify a mood or feeling. And poets will use these devices to make the language of the poem attractive and to make the poem a mood maker, really. So my point here is that the key to making a really good poem is to use effective word choices. Some of the poetic devices that you see in literary works include theme, imagery, sound, rhythm, stanza, lines, form, rhyme scheme, figurative language. And we will go over each of these. Theme is the message the author is trying to reveal to you in a literary work. It's the main idea, the whole meaning of the text that you are reading. And often this is an insight about human life or human nature. You may wonder, well, how do you identify or pick out the theme? After reading the text, summarize the plot, conflict, and the characters' personalities, and write down how the main characters change throughout the text. Then you want to determine how the plot, conflict, and characters connect to the title or the subject or topic. Finally, just think about, what is the author trying to tell me about human life, nature, mankind? An author will use words and phrases that specifically appeal to the 5 senses, and this is called imagery. So we have the senses of sight, touch, hearing, taste, and smell, and the word choices or the word phrases will specifically make you see whatever they're talking about, or hear that bird chirping, or smell that specific smell. Sound is another tool, and this uses, the poet will use rhyme or rhythm and or repetition to help the reader or listener to hear the poem. See, a rhythm or pattern can give a sing-songy effect to a poem. A sound or an illusion of almost hearing a repeated sound keeps the reader interested. When we talk about rhythm, it refers to the beat of a poem. And speaking of this rhythm, you'll hear it a lot in folk songs or nursery rhymes, and you probably still can recall many of these from your youth because of the pattern of the rhythm that was used. Word stanza just means the division in a poem. Think of it like a paragraph, where one paragraph ends and another begins. It's the break between them. So the stanzas in a poem can be uniform or they can be different. But all in all, a stanza contains all the lines in that section. You see here in this circled poem, If You Were poem, the first stanza is circled in red. And you can clearly see the break or the division between this, the first stanza, and the second stanza. Lines are just phrases or words that are in a stanza. See, poems will follow a certain order in which phrases or words in a line, not necessarily in a sentence. So one line would be a group of words or phrases until you go to the next line in a stanza. So in this first stanza of December Leaves, the first line contains the words, "The fallen leaves are cornflakes." Now that's not the end of the sentence, but that's where the first line is. And then it moves on to the second line and continues the sentence, "That fills the lawn's wide dish." The third line states, "And night and noon." The fourth line states, "The wind's a spoon." The fifth line states, "that stirs them with a swish." Now, although this was only one complete sentence, it was written in 5 different lines. Now, where you see these letters, those indicate rhyming words. So, by the indication of the matching letters, you can see which lines rhyme with which. And that brings us to rhyme scheme, or simply called rhyme. The ending words in a line may rhyme with other ending words in a line. And this pattern in which the rhyme sounds is called the rhyme scheme or rhyme pattern. It's also important to note that many poems have a specific rhyme scheme, but poems can rhyme or they don't have to rhyme. Looking at this example, you start with a letter A. At the end of the first line, the word is cloud. So cloud is circled red, indicating the first sound and given the letter A. On the next line, the last word is hills. Since it does not rhyme with cloud, it gets the next letter of the alphabet, B. And here it's indicated by the color green. On the third line is the word crowd. Aha! Now it rhymes with cloud in the first line, so it gets the same letter that cloud has. That's the letter A. On the fourth line is daffodils. And since it rhymes with hills, it gets the letter B. When you go down to the fifth line, the last word of that line is trees. Now, it doesn't rhyme with cloud and it doesn't rhyme with hills, so it gets its own next letter, which is C. Finally, the last line rhymes with trees. So it is the word breeze and it rhymes with trees, so you give it the same letter, C. We are at the end of the stanza, so you can then evaluate the pattern for that stanza. And in this case, it's A, B, A, B, C, C. So why do this? Why have this pattern? Well, it creates that rhythm that we were talking about, and then when you write the next stanza, you may want to repeat the same rhythm pattern. So if we look back at our previous poem, December Leaves, you can see the pattern of the first stanza is A, B, C, C, B. And if you look at the second stanza, it followed suit. It has the same pattern of A, B, C, C, B. It's important to note here that you start over with the letter A at the beginning of the next stanza. The last word of the first line in the second stanza is sifter. Notice it does not rhyme with cornflakes up in the first stanza. Even though the same pattern is used, you will still start over at each stanza. Figurative language is used all the time in poetry. It creates comparisons by linking the senses and the concrete to abstract ideas. Words or phrases are used in a non-literal way for a particular effect. For example, in figures of speech like simile, metaphor, personification, onomatopoeia, and that's a really fun word to say, and many more. But that will be the topic of our next video. But just know that a great writer of poems will use many varying forms of figurative speech. The form of a poem is how we describe the overarching structure or pattern of the poem. The examples I've shown you so far are structured poetry. And some forms of poetry must stick to very specific rules about length and rhythm and rhyme. But poets enjoy playing with form and often call it free verse. They often have fun making and breaking rules. Creative examples are shown here with these two. We just went over some poetic devices, which are really just literary devices but used in poetry. Again, poems, and I'm also including songs here as a form of poems because wouldn't you agree that some lyrics and music just sound poetic? But really good poems are created out of these poetic devices that we've gone over to create a sense of mood, intensify the meaning, and make an impression upon you, the reader or the listener. So next time you read a poem or listen to a song, see if you can determine specific poetic literary devices that are being used. Or when you try your hand at writing one, try using these on your own to enhance your very own poetic masterpiece. There's much more to learn about poetry, and if interested, just go ahead and dive into research about the poetic world.